all. Thank you for joining us at TCCA 2020. This year is our 10th anniversary, and we're so excited to have everyone attend all over the world virtually for this year's conference. My name is Meredith McHugh, and I'll be hosting this session. Before we get started, a few items. So if you have any comments, go ahead and place them in the box, and we'll be answering them throughout, or we'll answer them at the end. My co-host Chelsea will also be answering stuff, and she'll ask the questions at the end if we have time. We'll also give the password at the end, so just wait until the end for that. And it's my pleasure to introduce Lauren.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending the TCCA today, and thank you especially for joining my session. We're here today to talk about self-assessment, which is an aspect of game design that I think is really interesting when it comes to picking EdTech tools to use online with your classrooms. So I'm excited to get into that with you a little bit later once we get actually rolling and going with our presentation. I'll start off, though, by introducing myself. My name is Lauren Coleman, and you may have already picked up on my regional accent. I'm coming to you today from New Jersey. My husband is not a native to the New Jersey, New York area, and he always tells me that my accent is very noticeable at first. So no, I'm not a Texan, but I'm so excited to join you all today in this virtual TCCA conference. I know that you're probably a bit disappointed that you're not gathering together in person like you usually are, but a silver lining to this being virtual is the way that we can kind of connect and network in ways that we couldn't before across a larger span of the country and internationally. So I am so excited to be here. I learned about the conference from a company that I work with called Squiggle Park Dreamscape. They sent some of their sales team a year or two ago, and they could not stop raving. So they reached out to me this year when they heard it was virtual, and they said, make sure you can get yourself there. And today has been a really great learning experience for me today. I hope I can keep that alive and going for you with this session as well. One thing that I'm curious about that might be great for you to post in the chat as we're getting started is what kind of role you fill within your school district. I'm curious if we're talking today with classroom teachers or with administrators or maybe with tech coaches. So if you could post in the chat what your role is, that would be excellent. I'll try to see if maybe I can tailor things a little bit to better serve you. And as you do that, I'll also tell you a bit about my background. I already mentioned that I'm coming to you today from New Jersey, and I work there at a middle school. I'm a teacher at the North Brunswick Township School District, and I teach technology courses to 7th and 8th graders, as well as being the technology coach for my building. Beyond that, I've also had some experience working as an educational consultant. And as a tech coach, which is a position I've been in for about 3 years now, I have been tasked with trying to help the other teachers in my building with technology. I help them find products that they might be looking for if they're looking for an online resource. I sponsor some trainings, and I'm also helping out with the budget when it comes to selecting new tools to purchase. So whether you're a classroom teacher looking for things in your classroom, or on the district side, if you're interested in online resources and being selective and picking the good ones, that's going to be our topic of conversation today. And I'm hoping I can give you a few directives that might go in the right direction and make this an easier job for you, especially as we deal with the virtual and the hybrid aspect of this year. So to move along, the mission for today and the purpose of this session is to make sure that you feel prepared to pick EdTech tools. I'm working right now 100% virtual, and I was just speaking with Meredith about how many places in Texas are operating on a hybrid schedule. So I feel like more than ever, having online resources at your disposal is critical for your classroom success this year. But I'm sure you recognize this as well. It's difficult to sort of dig through the sales pitches and check out the tools and weed out what is a really valuable product versus one that might not be so effective in your classroom. And it can be overwhelming, especially when you're already in the heart of teaching to try to find something new. But I urge you to stick with it. I urge you to put some research into what you're picking out, because I really think it can make all the difference for the students and the staff and the classroom environment as a whole. Before I was a technology coach, I used to love to play around with things in my classroom. I was a grad student at the time, learning about things from other teachers in my program. I was active on Twitter. So I would stumble across some kind of new online resource, and I would just test it out with my kids in the classroom, see how it went. It all was really comfortable and fun for me. But once I became a technology coach and it was my job to recommend things across the building or sometimes even mandate use, it suddenly became a lot more of a high stakes environment for me. And whenever I would go to a sales pitch or whenever I would be playing around with some kind of new online educational resource, I was always thinking about my coworkers. It was almost like I could hear them like a little voice in my ear. And I had this mental checklist that I was always considering. I was wondering to myself, okay, is this standards aligned? Because I know the teachers are going to want it to be standards aligned. Does this fit with our current curriculum and the other things that we're doing? I wanted to basically make sure it was educationally sound. Then I would start looking into other things. Does it have dashboards? What are the dashboards like? Can we track progress easily with this tool? Are we going to be able to use this to inform insights? And lastly, and this is probably the big one, what does it cost? Especially this year, I feel like there's been a lot of budget cuts in educational environments as a result of the COVID pandemic. We're dealing with that in my school district personally. Whenever I see something new, I'm always wondering, is it worth the price? And not only can we afford it this year, but are we going to be able to afford it in the long term? Because if you're an educator, I'm sure you realize the longer you can stick with a tool, the longer that you can master it as a teacher, and then also have the students stick with it so that the gains can really have time to take effect, that makes all the difference. So all these things were like running through my head whenever I was looking at a tool, and that in and of itself can be overwhelming. I imagine no matter whether you're a classroom teacher or an admin or a tech coach, some of these things ring true for you as well. You're either looking at a tool yourself or something's getting handed down to you and you're like, okay, what is this and do I want this? But one of my best college professors reminded me in my graduate school program that at the end of the day, this is really about the students. The way he put it to me, and this has always stuck with me, is that the students are the primary users of any online education tool. They are the people who are going to be spending hours actually immersed in the lessons and doing the activities. The teachers, we're not the target audience. We're really more like a secondary audience. Yeah, we're probably going to get on there and make accounts for our little students. Yes, we're going to check the dashboards. But while it needs to be good for us, we also have to make sure that it's good for the students. And two other things that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at something new for your classroom is whether or not it seems based like a test and whether or not it seems simplistic or redundant. There's research out there, I'm actually going to get to this on my next couple of slides as well, that mentions that if your online learning environments look very much like a standardized test or some kind of formal exam, that can create a lot of anxiety for some students who have fears surrounding testing. And that may not be the best thing that you want to put across in your classroom. Also, if the online tools that you're selecting are practice tools that have a real skill and drill, sort of maybe repetitive multiple choice kind of setup, those might also lead to boredom. And that can be rough. I was in a session earlier today where we were talking about trying to get students engaged on Zoom calls and on Google Meet calls, and that in many cases, we're having kids not even show up or kids not even engage. So we want to make sure that if we are going to be doing this virtually or via a hybrid model, that we don't scare them off with the wrong tool. It may not be the best time to have something that seems too much like a test or something that may seem too dry. Engagement is really going to be key this year. And I imagine in every year going forward, once we find some things that are new and that are engaging. I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit more about the research that comes from tests and test anxiety. This research is not my own research, so I would totally be remiss if I did not credit a researcher, Valerie Shute. Dr. Val Shute is a professor at Florida State University, and her name is basically synonymous with the idea of stealth assessment. The title of this whole section, stealth assessment, it really all comes back to the research of Val Shute. She's done a lot of work into looking at how students respond to different kinds of educational tasks, especially tasks that are computer-based. And she has found that if students find something that looks like a test, if they feel like it's an examination or a high-stakes assessment, sometimes they get so anxious and worked up that they actually perform worse than they would have if it was a different kind of activity. she has found that sometimes test scores can differ from things like class projects, an out loud presentation, a worksheet, a group project, something of that nature. And that's a great thing to keep in mind when you're picking your tools. You don't want this to be too much like a test if it doesn't have to be. And I know that can be rough. A lot of times we're thinking, but wait, like I want to collect data in a direct way. I'm sure in the first couple of weeks of school, you were trying to get some diagnostic information about your students, either at a classroom level or if you're an admin, maybe at a building level. And I understand that tests are a great way to collect data quickly, especially something like a multiple choice test. But for those students who experience test anxiety, especially if you're working with special education populations, that data may be a little bit skewed. Val Schutt has found that the test anxiety can bias to the point where the grades actually look noticeably lower. So that's something good to keep in mind. There is a time and a place for tests. Of course, you might have to run a diagnostic, but you do want to keep in mind that if your entire environment is virtual and everything's an online tool, we don't want to make it feel like we're consistently testing class period after class period, day after day, with programs that open up to a white screen with multiple choice questions, or things where you're clicking along where the kids sort of feel like they're in the standardized testing environment. So I think that's a valuable thing to keep in mind. And a point that I hear sometimes in other school years is that we want to do some programs that look like tests to prepare students for state testing. And that can be valid, but then again, there's also a time and a place for standardized testing. I remember when the standardized testing thing was big. I don't know if you remember the PARCC testing. I know that Texas does not use that anymore, but that was a thing maybe like 10 years ago when that first rolled out to all of us. And teachers were discussing, there's a difference between teaching to the test and actually teaching, especially this year with many states starting to abandon standardized testing. That could be an interesting point to keep in mind. Michael Bonner actually brought this up during the keynote this morning as well. With the COVID crisis, a lot of states are canceling high stakes examinations. And if they are, that's even more reason for us to not lock students in to online programs that look like tests. But you may be wondering, well, what else is out there? Because a lot of what I'm using is a white screen with questions that pop up where the kids can put in multiple choice answers. And that is where stealth assessment comes up. Stealth assessment is basically the idea of hiding the educational content in an activity that is so fun and so practical that the students may not even realize at first that it is an educational task. They're usually set up like games, or if they're not really like entire games, they at least have some gamey elements to them. And as the students play the game, as they make decisions, as they move forward, as they make choices, the program is continuously collecting all of that data, which is going to populate a dashboard that teachers will be able to look at and see. And once you see the choices that students were making in the game or the actions that they took, you'll be able to sort of make inferences from that gameplay data and figure out who grasps the content and who does not. So this may seem foreign, but I actually don't think it's going to be as unfamiliar as you think. I have three examples. They are all pretty popular, and I think they're going to be programs that you've seen before, and they are exemplars or examples of stealth assessment. Basically, they are programs where students are playing and they don't feel like they have to perform for a grade. You're looking for games where there's data collection, but it's hidden. And this is something that's been around longer in the math and science subject areas. So if you're a math or a science educator, this is actually good for you. Tools have been coming out in this area for a longer span of time, and there's more of them out there. It's predominantly puzzle games. You'll find a puzzle game that's based upon either mathematical, physics, or engineering concepts. And to solve the puzzle, the student has to apply the knowledge that they've learned in your class. So they may have had YouTube videos that they've watched previously. There may be a textbook. There's obviously still a place for lecture and direct instruction. But then rather than giving them something that's skill and drill, you can set them up in a game like this. And the game will be an opportunity for them to prove what they know and for you to see how they do. The biggest example in the math and science field is a program called Physics Playground. I'm going to put that in the chat for Meredith. Physics Playground. And Physics Playground is a series of activities. I have one here that I can show you. They're actually kind of similar to some games even you might recognize from the App Store. Let me see if I can get this to play for you. Give me one moment. Okay, hopefully you're able to see that playing. Meredith will let me know if it's not going to load for you. But basically the idea here is to get that green ball to hit the red balloon. And you can see a player is drawing on the screen right now. I think that's like a fulcrum. I don't teach physics, so please don't judge me. But take a look at these lines that they're drawing. And the way that the player was able to use lines to drive that green ball into that red balloon. Physics Playground is mostly based on puzzles of this type. And as the students play, the levels become more and more rigorous and require the application of more and more topics, which I think is really interesting because rather than having them do skill and drill activities, this is fun. This may remind them of iPhone games that they're playing socially. And rather than feeling stress about having to perform and having to get the test items right, there's a better environment here to make mistakes, to try something out and to learn from it. And I've loved looking at how students tackle Physics Playground's problems because it's also such a great visual into their misconceptions and how they're not understanding the content. As you watch how many attempts it takes a player to get that green ball to move, as you watch where they might be drawing and what elements they're trying to force action upon, it's insightful. And I would say it might even be more insightful than just knowing which items on a test they got right or wrong. So if you're a math or a science teacher, definitely check out resources of this type. Physics Playground is my #1 example, but it's not the only puzzle tool out there. And these can be really great for motivating students who may have been more timid to jump into the content as well. And if you are a social studies or a English language arts teacher, there is stuff for you as well. So don't feel worried. It's not as common. It did take a couple of years for self-assessment to trickle into these subject areas. And it does look a little bit different in these subject areas as well. Again, the students are playing, not performing, but it's not really puzzle games. What you're going to find that they're doing instead is they're predominantly playing role-playing games. The student will play act as if maybe they're a historical figure from a certain time period, or they might play act as if they're a character in a book. And as they play, it's almost like an online choose your own adventure experience. I don't know if anybody else grew up in the 80s or the 90s like I did, or maybe you had kids in the 80s or the 90s, and you might remember them bringing home those choose your own adventure books that were all the rage back then. You would flip to a certain page, you'd have some choices you would pick. This is like the online equivalent of that. Your character in the game is going to read short snippets, they're going to watch scenes, they're going to hear from other characters in the game, and then they have to make decisions. And there's a lot that can be learned from that. Based on the decisions that a student makes in a historical role-playing game, you can understand if they really grasp the nuances of that time period from the other instruction that you've given them. And I'll show you how this can factor into language arts as well. Here is my #1 example for social studies. This is a game called Mission US. You can find them online at missionus.org, and it's by and large a role-playing experience. The example that we're going to watch here is a role-playing game based upon the American Revolution. And basically, it's set up as if you're a character in Boston trying to decide if you want to stay loyal to the crown or if you want to take up with the sons and the daughters of the American Revolution, with the patriots. And characters will speak to you. You'll watch certain scenes, and then decisions will appear. You'll play mini games, and you'll kind of see if you're able to survive this historical time period and how well you're able to connect with the other characters in the game. I love this as a culminating activity. Once the students are aware of who all the characters in the game represent, once they're recognizing the historical events that are present in the game, it can be a wonderful culminating activity for them to demonstrate their knowledge. And again, it's interactive and there's a dashboard so you can see how things are going, to see the decisions that your students make. I even love, as a language arts teacher, having writing prompts off of this, where the students reflect on the decisions that they made, if they think maybe they should have done something differently in the game, how that could have turned out. This is great for reflection and for inferencing. Another one that's going to be incredibly pertinent in the next couple of weeks is a game called Win the White House. Win the White House was developed by iCivics.org. And if you go to the iCivics website, they actually have hundreds of games on there that all relate to civic obligation in some way or another. I just happened to pick this one because I think it's particularly timely. 7th grade social studies students at my school were actually playing this week, and they're going to be picking up with it again on Monday as we head into the election. In this game, students act as if they are a candidate on the campaign trail. So they get to pick the political party with which they want to be affiliated. They do a great deal of research on key issues that candidates have to take stances on. They pick stances, they research, they prepare their talking points for the debates. It overlaps quite a bit with a persuasive writing unit from language arts. So there's a lot of information here about the electoral process, which is great for a history or a social studies class. But there's also a lot of thought that goes into an audience for writers, choosing the right points, organizing your thesis. And I think that can be great for a language arts class as well. I don't know how far ahead you lesson plan, but if you or maybe the teachers in your building would be interested in a very wonderful interdisciplinary unit for social studies and for language arts teachers to do together, I think that iCivics Win the White House could be a great, highly motivating activity. The students will fly in the game from state to state, and they'll have to tailor their points to try to convince voters to come on over to their side of the debate. And it's engaging. You know, the kids get to see their performance on each state. They get to change things up. And the feedback that they're getting from the game is so useful from a persuasive writing standpoint that I highly recommend this. So again, these are educational experiences. These may even be things that you're already doing in your classroom. And I love them because they're considered to be self-assessment. The students think that they're playing a game. They feel free to explore, free to learn, free to practice, and all of that high stakes pressure is out the window. But again, the educational content and the rigor can still be there. So if you've been sticking to things that are more skill and drill, I absolutely invite you to try to welcome some of these into your classroom. A lot of them, especially this Win the White House game, can work at any grade level as well. This game has an elementary, a middle school, and a high school version that brings the students deeper and deeper into issues, into higher levels of reading text. So this is a game that you can also play repeatedly or differentiate for your students as well. Those were my big 3 examples to show you, to sort of give you an idea of what self-assessment might look like. But of course, they're not the only programs out there that are based on a self-assessment model. What I want to talk about next is what I do when I test out something. I mentioned in the beginning that it feels more high pressure for me now to pick a tool, knowing that I have to pick something for all of the teachers in my building. And I have become a big fan of pilot sessions. Whenever I come to a conference and somebody is recommending a new tool to me, or if I'm snooping around on Twitter, I try to find something that offers a free trial. Because I think the best way to use something is to really get into it down and dirty, have the students try it out, have yourself explore it, but see if you can do that for free. And within the time span of that free trial, I recommend a pilot session. If you've never done a pilot session before, don't worry, I'm going to talk you through some of the things that I look for. I also recommend this linked Digital Promise Pilot Resource Toolkit that is here on this slide. By the way, these slides are already on the sched.com website. So if you head over to the Sched site, you'll be able to download my slides right away. You can also find this just by Googling Digital Promise. They have a full collection of like graphic organizers and documents you can use if you're conducting a pilot session. So if you're a technology coach like me and you want documentation of your work, definitely check out their toolkit. If you're a teacher hoping to convince your principal that something that you found is worthwhile for purchase, and you want to have a nice, formal, well-reasoned rationale set up, again, this toolkit is a great place to go. But if your school is also not that formal, and you don't really need to go lockstep and fill out graphic organizers and document, here are a quick couple of key points that come up for me whenever I do a pilot. So if I'm doing a pilot, I'm going to get my class, my 25, my 30 kids. We're going to test something out, and I'm going to invite some other adults to visit my classroom on that day. It might be other teachers who teach the same subject as me, who could be potential other users. It might be my supervisor, my principal, whoever's available, come on down. And once we're in the room, we're basically all just going to walk around and snoop and see what's going on and see how the kids are reacting. I do try, though, to give every adult in the room, every educational staff member, a different focus. So I'll usually ask one person to look for engagement. Just walk around and see if the kids seem to be on task. I teach 40-minute class periods, so I want the tool to keep the kids engaged for at least 20 minutes. Because I'm thinking, maybe I'll start with a short lesson, then we'll segue into using our computers for this program. I'll save some time at the end to wrap up. So 20 minutes of on-task behavior is a nice sweet spot for me. So I also think for elementary students and for middle school students, 20 minutes should be a long enough span of time that their attention span should last. I'll ask one of my colleagues to walk around and keep an eye on their screens and just see, are they still engaging with the tool? Or are they off task? Some of my students may be opening up other tabs, going to YouTube, looking up sports stats. Some of them might be disengaging from their Chromebooks. They might be wheeling away. They might be talking to a friend in person in the classroom. So we want to make sure that they can hold their attention. We know that middle school students and upper elementary students do have long attention spans if the game is good enough. I'm sure you've had kids come in after a weekend, and when you ask them what they did, they tell you that they played video games for hours. We're probably not going to be able to get that same kind of complete draw into the game that games that are made for leisure can do, but we still want to try to get 20 minutes of on-task behavior. You also may want to have another one of your colleagues, especially somebody who is highly qualified in this subject area, take a look at the students' screens while they're playing and try to spot the content. The idea behind these games is that it's not supposed to be skill and drill. You're not going to see big headings pop up with topics from your textbook, but somebody who is well-versed in the content should still see the curricular connections and the standards that are hidden from the kids inside the gamey activities. And you want to make sure that if they're playing for 15 or 20 minutes, that they are able to find that content. This is a big one for me. I have found some products that promised to be gamified education tools where the kids were able to avoid the actual schoolwork. Rather than opening up anything that was content-based, they would just decorate their home base or change their characters' outfits for 20 minutes and never get to the real questions. You want to make sure that the way that the game is designed in a thoughtful way where the students are forced to engage with the content and they can't duck it. So looking to see how quickly the content pops up and how well ingrained it is into the basic functions of the game, crucial. Lastly, you want the class's reaction. When the in-class gameplay ends, are the students begging for more time, or are they relieved? Sometimes you say that you're done and the kids close up their Chromebooks and they're like, phew. Other times they're like, come on, miss, 5 more minutes. You want to see what the vibe is for this game because you want something where it's going to be interesting enough to potentially last a whole school year, or at the very least, take you through maybe a month-long unit. So we want that engagement to be there. And we're going to see that based on their reaction when the class time ends. I also always want there to be a dashboard. A dashboard is the difference between a game and a gamified edtech tool. If they're just playing a game, I may not know how they're doing. If I'm going to use this kind of stealth assessment model to replace more skill and drill tools, I do still need those dashboards. I still need data. I still need to know how my kids are doing. I still need to be able to report back to my principal or to the parents. So you always want to make sure that there are dashboards and the dashboards are insightful enough. With a good stealth assessment game, the gameplay experiences into more academic dashboards for you. They should be showing you the skills that are strengths and weaknesses for each child or the standards that the students are missing. So it should still look very teachery, even if it is a game experience on the student end. I also like to look to see if there is a way to tell the difference between when the kids are playing. if the students are playing at school only, or if it was fun enough that some kids even chose to play it at home in their spare time. I mentioned earlier that I work for a company called Squiggle Park Dreamscape. I'm one of their teacher consultants, and they make a game, a reading game, for students in grades 3 through 8. It looks like this. And I was teaching 8th grade language arts a couple years ago, and I decided to give it a test run in my classroom. I was wondering if my 8th graders would like it because they're on the upper end of that spectrum. It's a game for grades 3 through 8. So I was like, let's see how the 8th graders do. Do they buy into it? And it's a game that's somewhat based upon Clash of Clans. If you played Clash of Clans on your phone when that was pretty popular, this might look like a pretty familiar looking game to you. The idea is that you have a base to defend. You can battle other players, but the only way to make gains in this game is to answer questions that are related to reading or grammar or something else within language arts. And in this game, one thing that the developers did to try to encourage the kids to keep on playing at home is they added in some reward boxes. You can see the reward boxes there inside the yellow circle. One box had a big sun on it, and one box had a big moon on it. And if the students went over to the sun box while they were playing in the classroom, the sun box would open and in-game rewards would appear and the students would get rewarded. But if they went over to the nighttime box that had a moon on it while they were at school, it would not open, it would not unlock. In order to get that moon box to open and gain access to those rewards, the students had to come back after 3 p.m. and play then. And this little tactic was surprisingly effective. A lot of students did check back to see what the reward box did after 3 p.m., and a good deal of them wound up staying online to play. I had students who loved the competitive battling aspect, who were making arrangements to battle their classmates for fun after school. I had other kids who wanted to battle well in the classroom, who were brushing up on their skills and doing the reading comprehension questions at home to raise their level and be ready for battles in the classroom. And little things like these reward boxes can make that feel all the more gamified and all the more engaging. I remember giving way more dry instructions to my students when I've used other platforms. I remember telling them, stay on this website until the timer hits 10 minutes. Or I remember telling them, stay on this website until the progress bar gets up to 80%. Yes, those are benchmarks, but those benchmarks may not be as exciting to the students as something like this. And that's where I think stealth assessment games really succeed. They pique your curiosity, they inspire your creative side or your competitive nature, and that's where the buy-in comes in that hopefully leads to even more practice than you might get from the other tools. Lastly, my last tip about pilot sessions, make sure that you talk to the kids. As I said earlier, they are the primary users. School staff, we are the secondary users. So you want to make sure that the kids like what they are doing and that they understand what they're doing. One of my old principals, whenever he would do an observation or an evaluation for the teacher, he would stroll into the room, he would walk over to a student, seemingly at random, and he would just plop down and say, hey, what you doing? And the kids would sometimes give him the most off-the-wall answers, sometimes so candid and honest. But that was his way of gauging if they understood the objective for the day, if they were working, what they were doing. And I've mimicked his approach a little bit. I don't stay as general as him. I don't ask what you doing. But if I'm visiting a classroom as the tech coach, I might walk over to a student who's on their device and I might say, hey, what are you doing on this website? And then I'll give them 3 choices. Are you taking a test? Are you practicing? Or are you playing a game? And that has made the world of difference for me trying to figure out how a child is gauging a learning experience. If they tell me that they're taking a test, I know that they regard this as high stakes. I know that that pressure is there. If they tell me that they're practicing a skill, usually that aligns with something that's a little bit dry, skill and drill, multiple choice questions, drag and drop questions. But if they tell me that they're playing, then I know that I found a winner. Something I'm going to be recommending to other teachers that was going well in this classroom. Some other questions that I've seen on surveys is asking students, what's your favorite part of this learning program? Some might just say straight up that they like the game. Other students might name some of the game aspects, like battling other players or building up a base. And those things show that the game is convincing to them. You might also ask them, like, hey, like, do you think that this game is keeping track of how you're doing? Like, do you think your teacher can see how you're doing? A surprising number of students are not even aware that there's an assessment aspect to these, which means that you're getting some really honest and relatable data about what they truly know, which can be so beneficial. It's not skewed, it's not biased, they're not high stakes. And that's what I think is so worthwhile about self-assessment. So to wrap up, thanks again for your time. Here's my Twitter handle. If you have any questions, we can chat on Twitter, as well as my email address. In addition, I have links here in the chat to all of the programs that I mentioned. I'm sorry, I have links here on the slide. I'm used to teaching in my Google Meet with my kids, links in the chat. I have links here on the slide to all the programs that I mentioned, and this slideshow is available on the Sched website for you to take a further look at. With that being said, I think we have 10 or 15 minutes left. So Meredith, would it be okay to open it up to questions?
Yes, and I'll bring Chelsea on. I don't see that many, so if anybody wants to go ahead and answer, I think we do have one.
I think you addressed one, Meredith, with can any of the games be embedded in the Schoology?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not a Schoology user myself. The school district for which I work is using Google Classroom as our model of implementation. But what's nice about these games is just that it's a simple link. So if there's a place for you to drop a link inside your learning management system, whether it's Canva or Schoology or Google Classroom, I typically post the link and then the students can head over there. Within Google Classroom, some of these games also have the embedded feature for Google Classroom. I know that Squiggle Park Dreamscape has that. So I think it should be fairly easy with a link to be able to have some kind of connection. Do you want to say more, Meredith?
Yeah, they can post a link anytime in Schoology. Same with Canvas. The state of Texas is everyone has to use Schoology if they choose to in the district. They paid for it, but links always can go in there. But embedding, you would have to check each website. Since you gave so many great resources, each one's going to be different. I also checked out that White House one while you're doing the presentation. I like that one a lot.
My students were into it, Meredith. They were coming to my class, because I teach the computer classes. They were coming from social studies to computers, and I can see their screens. We have a program in my district where I can watch their Chromebook activities, and I could see they still had it open. And I was like, "All right, you guys, like we're going to be moving on. Like we're going to have to close out of last period's work." And they're like, "But I'm fighting for Texas. I'm fighting for California. It's a big state."
Yeah, and I was going through, and I like that they also have lesson plans available for you too to download, and you can use in your class too if kids don't have computers or something like that. That's another great thing. But yeah, there aren't any more questions.
No problem. Thank you so much.
I loved your thing. It was self-assessment. I think it's great. I think most students should be doing this now. I tried to do it in my classroom when I was teaching. But I'm going to go over some stuff. Y'all can check out more sessions at the end. Thanks for coming on. That was a great session. And if you want to go to any more, please visit our sched.org and go visit our vendor stuff on there too. Sorry, I'm removing stuff too. Down at the bottom, the secret word is scrolling across. Remember, it is case sensitive when you do it. And just recommending for the certificates, please download them. Then type in your name, then open them, then type in your name and save them again. That's the best way to get it. So you can share it with anybody you want to, or screenshot it, whichever you prefer. Anyways, the word is tenacity. I had to practice on that word because I see it as T-cities. I'm dyslexic, so I had to say it a couple times in my head, but it's tenacity. I'll leave it scrolling for a few minutes so y'all can go for it. And everybody says thank you on the chat.
Thank you. Great to hear.
No problem. All right, I'm going to leave it scrolling for a little bit, and then we'll close on out once y'all get it.